read the affidavit. Can you kind of explain to me what federal charges Brad Simpson is facing and what do those stem from?
Okay. So right now, the federal charge he's facing is a possession of an illegal weapon, which is going to be the short-barreled firearm. And so it's a rifle. It's designed to be fired from the shoulder, so it's got a shoulder stock. So it has to have a barrel length of at least 16 inches. This particular firearm had a barrel length of 8 inches. Now, it is possible for someone to legally obtain one of those guns, but they would need to go through a registration process with the ATF, with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. And evidently that was not done in this case.
What about the silencers? Are the silencers legal to own? What's the process for it to be legal to own those?
So an individual can obtain a silencer. However, they do have to apply for and register that firearm with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. Again, there's a process for them to do that. And obviously, they're going to take a look at that person. They're going to verify that they don't have any like disqualifying convictions or a protective order that would allow them to obtain that. And in that case, they also have to pay what they call a tax stamp. And if they follow all those processes, they can obtain a silencer. And my understanding is that Mr. Simpson did have several silencers that were legally registered and followed that process.
Okay, and so what are some of the disqualifications that would prevent somebody from either owning the silencer or the short barrel rifle?
Okay, well, so there is a variation between Texas law and federal law. So when we talk about obtaining those items, we're primarily talking about federal law. So anybody who was under a protective order, usually that would be a family violence situation, but not always, but most often. Also someone who was convicted of a family violence offense would be barred, or anybody who had a felony conviction, so that would be possession of a firearm by a felon. So any of those people would be disqualified from obtaining those items.
Okay, and so, the ATF put a hold on him immediately from the time he was arrested. Do you think that could have something to do with the circumstances of his wife missing, or is that something they would have done to begin with if this was anybody else?
I think it's something they would have done if it was anybody else. It's obviously illegal to possess that type of firearm, and it's a fairly serious charge. It's a felony charge, would up to 10 years in prison and a fine of up to $250,000. So in itself, it's a serious charge. So I think that they would have proceeded on that regardless. Now, obviously, is there a chance that there was some added urgency because is his risk as a flight risk increased by the fact that his wife is missing and the fact that he's facing these misdemeanor charges? Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and so, but the charge for the short barrel rifle, that you don't think that has anything to do with his wife missing? That is something that that the ATF would have charged anyway, whether it was somebody else.
If they were aware of it. Now, they may not have been aware of it unless all these things happened that led them to get a search warrant for the house. And I believe also the family members informed that there were some firearms for them to be collected. So absent that, they might not have found out about it at this time. So that was probably a catalyst to bring this all about.
And all of the other firearms that he did have in his possession, he did legally own all of those other.
I don't know all of them, but what I did see was that he had several silencers. There were no charges filed against those. I think if he had other illegal weapons, it would be in the affidavit that the ATF produced, and it was not. So I assume this is the only one.
Okay, and so you were talking about this is a serious charge. Most of the time, I'm assuming the ATF is going to persecute to the full extent and ask for the maximum penalty?
Well, not always the maximum, but understand in a federal system, there are certain sentencing guidelines that have to be followed. So a judge has kind of a roadmap to follow for what would be an appropriate sentence. And they're going to take into all kinds of considerations. They're going to take into consideration their prior criminal history, other crimes that may be committed, other things like that. So there's a lot of different, there's various aggravating factors. So there's usually a sentencing guideline that's like a kind of a go by for the federal court. And then obviously the prosecutors are going to make a recommendation of what they think is appropriate. and try to work out some type of plea bargain in almost every case.
Okay, and so from a prosecutor's standpoint, because you've also been in that case, I would say right now, I guess, what would be the most damning aspect of all of this with his now firearms charge?
Well, I think that all these things that are happening, I mean, obviously you have somebody who may or may not, we don't know, but it's possible that they may have injured somebody and maybe even taken their life. So obviously that is somebody who's very dangerous and could potentially be somebody that as a prosecutor you would want to keep off the streets and out of the possession of firearms. So I mean, I think there would be an extreme motivation on the part of any prosecutor to attack that case vigorously.
Okay, from a prosecutor stand again, with all of the firearms that he did have, things of that nature, if he does get convicted of this federal charge, that would bar him, or I guess exclude him from owning firearms again?
Yes, so if he were to be convicted of the federal offense, that would ban him forever from possessing a firearm. He would be a convicted felon. There's very strict penalties for someone to get arrested after that with a firearm. Additionally, if he's convicted in state court of the family violence charges, there's a federal law that would ban him potentially for life. There's a state law that would ban him for at least 5 years. So either which way, I believe it's most likely, if he were to be convicted of any of these offenses, he would be difficult for him to possess a firearm.
Okay. So is there something about this case that maybe is standing out to you right now, especially in your field with firearms charges, that's standing out that maybe not everybody else is going to catch it or think of it when they look at this?
Well, I think that right now what needs to happen is a thorough investigation needs to occur into the disappearance of his wife. Okay, and I think that that is something that's going to be done. I'm sure that they're working on that right now. So obviously that would be kind of pressing. I think the short-barreled firearm issue is relatively straightforward. He's got this weapon, it's not properly registered. That's fairly cut and dry. So that should be a relatively easy case for them to obtain a conviction on.